In 1970, President Nixon nominated Judge Harrold Carswell as a justice of the Supreme Court. The nomination was met with a great deal of opposition due to Carswell's history of racial bias and support of white supremacy. At his appointment hearing, many speakers testified against Carswell. One of these speakers was the recent founder of the National Women's Organization, Betty Friedan. She argued that a judge who opposed racial equality would oppose gender equality as well. I can assure you that the emerging revolution of the no longer quite so silent majority will pose many pressing new problems to our society, problems which will inevitably come before the courts and which indeed will probably preoccupy the Supreme Court of the 1970s, as did questions arising from the civil rights movement in the 1960s. It is already apparent from decisions made by judges in other circuit courts that Judge Carswell is unusually blind in the matter of sex prejudice, and that his blindness will make it impossible for him to judge fairly the cases of sex prejudice that will surely come up. By equating Carswell's racial prejudice with his prejudice towards women, Friedan is using logos to allow her audience to understand Carswell's inability to view issues regarding these groups without a bias. Friedan wanted to make sure that whoever had power as a judge wasn't discriminatory towards women, because working with the judiciary system was entirely necessary as a feminist. The elimination of potentially oppressive laws and the enforcement of laws that existed to protect women was essential to making any change. If the law against sex discrimination means anything, it must protect employment opportunities for those groups of women who most need jobs because of economic necessity. Working mothers of preschoolers are such a group. Studies show that, as compared to women with older children or no children, these mother of preschool children were much more likely to have gone to work because of pressing need, because of financial necessity, and because their husbands are unable to work. Frequently, these women are a key or only source of income for their families. 68% of working women are raising children in poverty. Moreover, a barrier to jobs for mothers of preschoolers tends to harm non-white mothers more than white mothers. Again, Friedan is using logical appeals to make her audience recognize Carswell's prejudice towards women. Carswell's rulings as a judge in circuit courts opposed and disregarded Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which was intended to protect the rights of marginalized groups, including women. Earlier in her testimony, she offered a great deal of statistics about working women, saying that the number of women in the workplace has nearly doubled over the previous decade, which is another use of logos. In addition, she uses pathos by speaking about how the employment barrier doesn't only affect women, it affects their children as well. Human rights are indivisible, and I, and those for whom I speak, would oppose equally the appointment to the Supreme Court of a racist judge who had been totally blind to the humanity of black men and women since 1948, and the appointment of a sexist judge totally blind to the humanity of women in 1969. To countenance outright sexism when American women, not in the hundreds or thousands, but in the millions, are finally beginning to assert their human rights is unconscionable. Friedan forced the Senate to contemplate their responsibility to appoint a justice who is able to maintain the humanity the Supreme Court requires, which was the strongest use of pathos in her testimony. Here, she once again emphasizes her most powerful point: a racist judge is going to be a sexist judge. Friedan also uses ethos in this excerpt, recognizing her responsibility to represent the millions of women in the U.S. who were, as she says, beginning to assert their human rights. How would you feel if you applied for a job at some company or law firm or university and told you weren't eligible because you had a child? How would you feel if your sons were told explicitly or implicitly that they could not get or keep certain jobs if they had children? Then how do you feel about appointing to the Supreme Court a man who has said your daughters may not hold a job if they have children? Although she is asking loaded questions, this is a powerful use of pathos. Friedan is appealing to the personal lives and experiences of the Senate and allowing them to make the connection between their own rights as men and the rights of women. Friedan draws many parallels throughout her testimony, making her use of logos extremely effective. While logos was the rhetorical device she used the most, her application of ethos as the quintessential feminist of the 70s, and pathos as a woman who understands the human condition of sympathy, were both entirely effective in their own respect. Perhaps motivated by Friedan's inspirational testimony, the Committee on the Judiciary of the U.S. Senate voted against Carswell's appointment. After this decision, many steps were taken by the Supreme Court during the following decade to ensure equal rights for women. Betty Friedan's use of rhetorical skills caused many women to question their position in society, and while it's a battle that has yet to be won, Friedan helped us take one step closer to achieving equality.